Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Handicap Movers and Shakers. Thanks very much for the interaction on the first 2 episodes. It's pleasing to see that many of you are enjoying it, so I'll endeavour to keep going. I actually thought this week was going to be a quiet one. In the early part of last week, there wasn't an awful lot that was catching my eye, but actually towards the back end of the week, there was a good few that I thought looked interesting. The handicap marks have matched up with what I was hoping for, so I've actually ended up with 10 on this week's list. So without hanging about, I'll get straight to it. As ever, start with the new entries, always the ones I find most interesting. And there's 2 this week that I thought have arrived on what I think are fairly nice marks. The first is the Ian Williams trained Walk in the Storm, who ran at Utoxeter on the 11th of February. She was actually quite well backed into favourite, but she just found it all happening far too quick. Having jumped off quite prominently, she jumped quite scrappily, got bumped by another mare jumping into her, and just got shuffled back. So having jumped off prominently, as they turned away down the back straight, she found herself in last place and just looked as if she was in top gear the whole way. And as a result, it put great emphasis on her jumping, and it didn't really stand the test. She was quite fiddly, she was quite slow. She was shuffling left and shuffling right. Just looked to me like a mare that was not comfortable at that speed. She did stick to it really well and made quite eye-catching progress to finish 4th. She wasn't knocked around to do that. I thought it was a really considerate ride. I think she's, definitely better than she showed there. She's got an opening mark of 83. She's going to be interesting off that mark, particularly if found maybe a bit of slower ground, or preferably a little bit further, 2 mile 2, something like that, even 2 mile 4. I think 83 definitely underestimates her. Didn't go right for it, Utoxeter. I wouldn't judge her solely on that. And given the market support, it's clear that the yard thinks she's useful. So 83 shouldn't be beyond her. So that's Walk in the Storm. Second one is the Tom Weston trained Black Tonic, who again ran on Saturday down at Warwick. He's been keen in all of his runs, and I'm pretty certain that Luke Scott, who's a very capable £7 conditional, would have been hoping to find some cover in what was a pretty big field. And it just didn't happen. Holmback bounced out the gate, and by the time they got to the first hurdle, the entire field was sort of spread across half of Warwickshire. Luke just found himself in no man's land, sort of sat in mid position, but with no one around him, and the horse was very, very keen. However, despite that, his jumping was really slick, really impressive, looked like a hurdler, nice and low and fast. And he was the only one to come out of the pack and get anywhere near to the front 3, who were decent horses, Holmback and Gitchigumi. He stayed on really well, which, given how exuberant he was and how much he over-raced in the early stages, I thought suggests he's clearly got some engine. He's obviously a work in progress, but I would think they'll hope that going into handicaps now off a mark of 100, I would think they'll try and find a fairly decent-sized field where he can perhaps get covered up. And if he does learn to race a bit more efficiently, I think he's a nice horse. And a mark of 100, although not overly lenient perhaps on what he's achieved on the track, I think he's definitely capable of better. He's a horse that's gone into my tracker. I'd be wary of him in a small field, but if it was a race where I thought he could find a bit of cover, I think he's a smart animal in the making. Now we move on to horses going down in the handicap, and there's 2 for this section as well. The first is the Tim Vaughan trained Invincible to Me, who ran at Foss Lass on the 9th of February. Now, he's certainly not anywhere near as good or as quick as his half-brother Gentleman to Me. It just shows, pedigrees out of the same mare. This guy by a decent stallion and authorised, but he's just nowhere near the quality of his half-brother. He ran at Foss Lass. He was in a handicap. He was just outpaced the whole way up the home straight, having actually travelled quite nicely through the race. His jumping was pretty solid. That kept him in it, but he just didn't have the gears of those in front of him, and he plugged on to finish 4th. It wasn't a bad effort. He's been dropped down a pound now to a mark of 71, which, 72, 71, that's not making an awful lot of difference of the weight he's going to carry or the grade he's going to run in. But I just thought on his first try in handicaps, there was signs of ability that this horse could win a race. I would be surprised if they don't up him in trip. And in fact, he's entered at Taunton over 2 mile 3 next Tuesday. If he takes up that engagement, he'd be of interest to me. Taunton is a slightly sharp track, which might just not suit. Fosslas is quite a nice galloping track, but the extra 3 furlongs certainly should suit this horse better. And depending on what opposition he's up against, Invincible to me, entered at Taunton next Tuesday, is one that I'll definitely be having a good look at. The next horse is the Henry Daly trained Bridge North. He ran at Newbury on Saturday, February the 11th. He's had a really moderate season so far, but I thought he took a big step back in the right direction here. He just again looked to get outpaced on what we're talking about unseasonably quick ground, which just seems to be completely across the country and doesn't seem to show any sign of disappearing. Just looked outpaced by the 4 that finished in front of him. He has got quite a knee action and quite a short choppy action, which suggests he would be suited by softer ground, and both his wins came on soft ground. But you have to bear in mind that after a poor run at Sandown this year, the trainer representative did say that he would be better on better ground. They did, however, then go on to run him on soft ground at Cheltenham on his next start. So I'm prepared to believe that's possibly the scenario where soft ground at Sandown rides an awful lot more testing than soft ground in other places. And like I said, it's been soft ground the twice he's won. I do think this horse needs soft ground. He's dropped £1 for that effort down to 124. And I think if he gets back on soft ground, if it rains at any point, as long as it's not at Sandown, I think this mark now, 124, looks workable, and he's capable of winning a race off this mark over 3 miles. Horses going up now, and we'll start with a horse that's really sort of flummoxed me this year. Pearly Island, Lucy Wadham trained, ran at Market Raisin on the 7th of February. And I was certain this horse started the season well handicapped off a mark of 113, and he's made a complete fool of me. He's been pretty poor in his first 4 runs, although admittedly one of those was when the saddle slipped under a conditional jockey. But he did finally get off the mark in a handicap off a mark of 104 in a conditional rider's handicap, with his rider taken off a further £8. So that was nothing to get excited about, and he got a £7 rise for that. But they returned him to novice company under Brian Hughes at Market Raisin, and he ran a really good race in the third to finish 8.5 lengths behind the 130 rated Hugo's horse, who got a great ride by Freddie Gingell, and 8 lengths behind the 122 rated Tighten Your Belts. So a pound rise up to 112 doesn't seem unduly harsh, and if his confidence is boosted now by 2 good runs back to back, I think there is scope still in his mark, and he's definitely a horse to put in your tracker and keep him in there, because I think he's going to make a better chase than he's been a hurdler. He tends to jump a bit up and down over his hurdles. He's not the slickest hurdler. Big, strong chasing sort from a decent stout pedigree. Yeah, I think 113 over hurdles is workable, and providing he doesn't go sky up in the handicap, I think chasing next year will be even more his game. On the 9th of February at Huntingdon, I thought Move It Like Minnie ran a really good race. He was actually dropping back a furlong in trip from when he'd won at Huntingdon previously, and that showed actually. Travelled really strongly into the race, but then turning into the home straight, the 2 in front of him, Songino, who's got proven speed for 2 miles, won some good 2 mile handicap hurdles. He took 2 or 3 lengths out of Move It Like Minnie and just won the race at that stage. Move It Like Minnie did stay on really well at the back of the last hurdle to the line. Wasn't all that long a run in either. Made good progress to only be beaten just under a length. He's up £1 to a mark of 117, and I think that remains workable, particularly if upped back in trip. So it's 2 mile, 4.5 furlongs when he won at Huntingdon. I think that's minimum trip for him, and I think he'll probably stay a little bit further. He does seem best when going right-handed. Then the next one is the Nicky Henson trained Noel Feely Racing Syndicate owned Queen's Rock, who won at Doncaster on the 9th of February. She won really, really easily off what looks like in hindsight and at the time actually, a very lenient mark of 109. She was just in control of the race from the outset. took it up entering the home straight and just galloped them into submission, jumped really nicely under Nico de Boisville. She's been given an £11 rise for that, which is a big rise in itself, but I just don't think that's going to stop her. And I think the way she stayed on powerfully to the line and just looked to have this style of a relentless galloper, I think she can go up in trip from here. A half sister, she's a half sister to Clondall Castle, who has stayed 3 miles in later in his career. Though I think he was sort of a horse that was just too free to help himself, which is why he's running over shorter. So I think there's plenty of stamina in the pedigree over through 2.5 up to 3 miles. I think she's just going to keep staying ahead of the handicapper if they up her in trip. I thought she was really impressive and definitely one to keep on side. And then the final one that I've got in the going up section is more just to highlight how the handicapper works, and it's Orkan Risk, who won the Betfair Hurdle at Newbury on the 11th of February. It was a brilliant trading performance to capitalise on his hurdle mark, which was £7 below his chase mark. And it was also an equally excellent front-running ride from Nick Schofield, who did a great job of setting really strong fractions, but had also just kept enough in reserve to finish the race strongly when Filey Bay came to challenge him. They found plenty. Now, he's gone up £9 over hurdles, and that's a sizable chunk, albeit the front two did pull 11 lengths clear of the third horse. But when you watch the race back, it's hard to see how that race could have gone any better. He never missed a beat at his hurdles. He was exceptional at every single hurdle. He got the run of the race, and it's hard to see where that extra advantage is going to come from. And then you think, that's okay, Mr. Gordon, you can just go back over fences now, and you're actually £2 lower over fences than you are over hurdles. But unfortunately, the handicapper has put them up £2 over fences as well, which to me just seems wrong. If you're approaching it at the hurdling and chasing are two different disciplines, which they are, I fail to see why, having humped him up £9 over hurdles, it's then justifiable to put him up £2 over fences rather than leave Chris Gordon and Connection some wriggle room. I think as a result, he's probably slightly better handicapped now over fences than over hurdles if you view his narrow 1 length second to Boot Hill in the Wayward Lad Novices Chase. But it might be that Chris Gordon looks to utilise a claimer. I mean, his son Freddie is a very capable amateur. I think things are going to get tough now for Orkan Risk, but they've had their day in their son. They've won a big pot. Wouldn't go feeling too sorry for them, but I just did think that £2 over fences on top of the £9 over hurdles was a slightly unnecessary move by mean old Mr. Handicapper. And then we finish with a couple of non-movers. The first one is a horse that actually won at Newbury on Saturday, 11th of February, Cur Seren. Now, he won a race for John Joe O'Neill Jr. and his father in a race that slightly fell apart with McFabulous, who was a short price favourite, pulling up. But I thought he was actually ultimately quite impressive. He was outpaced going to the cross fence at Newbury, and John Joe was very careful with his jumping up the home straight. He didn't fire him at any fence at all. There was a good stride to the last, which he found and moved down to, but every other fence up the home straight, he sort of just had him on a fairly tight rein and made sure he got him to the other side. And I think that's a result of this horse taking a while to get the hang of jumping fences. He's had 4 efforts up until then, and his jumping had been pretty sketchy, particularly in his first 2 efforts. I think this is a project that they've been building. I'm not sure they would have gone to Newbury expecting to win or even having designs on winning, but Winnie did, and having given away lengths up the home straight through taking his time with the fencing, he landed from the last and quickly put 9 lengths between him and Unanswered Prayer, who finished second, and was very, very powerful through the line. I think this is a horse off a mark now of 140, which remains unmoved, can land a big pot over 3 mile plus. He is in the National Hunt Amateurs Chase. I wonder whether he might also get an entry in the Kim Muir. Now, his jumping has been a bit hit and miss. It was much better at Newbury on Saturday. Big Field Handicap is obviously going to put it under more pressure, but I think he's a horse with a big engine. He's going to stay much further than 3 miles. He's got into my tracker, and given the right circumstance and the right price, he's a horse I'd be interested in. But for me, the biggest eye catcher of the week came in the Betfair Hurdle, and it was York C who finished 4th. He was fully under the pump, exiting the back straight. It was just all happening too quick for him. But some very slick jumping up the home straight saw him finish never near 4th, and he finished like a train. Both his 2 best pieces of form have come over 2 mile 1, when winning at Fontwell this season and when finishing at 2nd at Cheltenham in a juvenile contest last year. Handicap has left him unchanged on a mark of 126. I'd be very surprised now if they don't move him up in grade. Mark of 126 is probably going to see him miss out on, the Coral Cup, certainly miss out on that, and most likely not get into the conditional jockey to the Martin Pipe at Cheltenham Festival either. But Cheltenham's not the be-all and end-all. There will be nice handicap prizes to be won with this horse. Over 2 mile 3, 2 mile 4, I think he's absolutely on a winning mark of 126. He's gone into my tracker. I've double-checked my tracker. This is a horse I'm really keen on. And I think if he's upped in trip for a very, very shrewd yard, then he's a certain winner in waiting. And then just to wrap up, Phoenix Way, who I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, he was a very fast finishing 4th over 2.5 miles at Cheltenham. I said to look out for him, perhaps when going back right-handed, and certainly when going over further than 2.5 miles. And I've got my wish. He's entered and declared in the 2:25 at Ascot on Saturday, steps back up to 3 miles. Lorcan Murta takes £3 off this fair mark of 140. He's got winning form at this track. He's also finished 2nd at this track from just 2 starts. It's a competitive heat, but I think on his last run, this mark is now very workable. He'll like going right-handed. He'll appreciate the extra distance, and he's certainly on my shortlist as one to look at for the Saturday racing. So that concludes episode 3 of Handicap Movers and Shakers. I'll be back tomorrow with From the Steward's Room. But as ever, please please subscribe. I've got plans for a couple of extra pieces coming in the next couple of weeks, not Cheltenham focused. There's enough Cheltenham content on your social media, on my social media, to last everybody. So it won't be Cheltenham focused, but a few pieces that I hope you'll find interesting coming in the next couple of weeks. So when you watch the end of this video, just take the time to hit subscribe, and hopefully you won't miss it. Until then, I'll see you next time.